Juneteenth is one of the most important dates in American history, but its meaning is often misunderstood. It is not simply the day slavery ended everywhere in the United States at once. Instead, it marks a powerful moment in a much longer and more uneven process, the day federal authority finally announced and enforced emancipation in Texas, one of the last places where slavery continued after the Civil War was effectively lost by the Confederacy. The name itself blends June and 19th, pointing to June 19, 1865. On that day, Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, and issued an order declaring that enslaved people were free under the Emancipation Proclamation. For the people who heard it, this was not an abstract political statement. It was news that changed family life, labor, movement, identity, and the future. To understand why Juneteenth matters, it helps to remember that slavery did not end in one clean national moment. The Civil War shattered the slave system piece by piece. In some areas, Union military victories brought freedom earlier. In other places, enslaved people forced the issue themselves by escaping plantations, refusing work, seeking Union lines, demanding wages, and, in many cases, joining the fight against the Confederacy. Freedom was not only something handed down by presidents and generals. It was also something pursued, pressured, and claimed by enslaved people under dangerous conditions. That is why Juneteenth carries such weight. It represents not only an official announcement, but also the closing of a gap between law, war, and lived reality. The Emancipation Proclamation had taken effect on January 1, 1863, more than 2 years before Juneteenth. But its reach depended on military power. It applied mainly to areas in rebellion against the United States, and where the Union Army could not yet enforce it, slavery often continued in practice. Texas was geographically distant from many major battlefronts, and enslavers saw it as a place where the institution could survive longer. Some even moved enslaved people there during the war, hoping to keep them beyond the reach of Union forces. This delay is central to the meaning of Juneteenth. The holiday reminds us that a legal declaration is not always the same as immediate liberation. Rights must be enforced, communicated, protected, and made real. When General Granger issued his order in Galveston, he was acting in the aftermath of Confederate collapse. The Civil War had ended militarily in the spring of 1865, but the consequences still had to be carried into places where old power structures remained. Granger's order announced that enslaved people were free and that the relationship between former masters and formerly enslaved people would become one of employer and hired labor. That language may sound limited today, and the reality after emancipation was full of conflict, exploitation, and broken promises. But the announcement still marked a decisive rupture. It told Texas enslavers that slavery could no longer be treated as a local custom protected by distance. Federal power had arrived, and the old legal order was over. Even after Juneteenth, the full abolition of slavery in the United States required another step, the 13th Amendment. Congress proposed the amendment in January 1865, and it was ratified in December of that same year. This amendment abolished slavery nationally, except as punishment for crime. Its ratification mattered because the Emancipation Proclamation had been a wartime measure, while the amendment changed the Constitution itself. By June 1865, most enslaved people had already been freed through Union military action or state abolition laws, but not all. The remaining enslaved people in places such as Delaware and Kentucky were freed when the amendment became law. Juneteenth therefore sits between military emancipation and constitutional abolition, connecting battlefield victory to permanent legal change. The first Juneteenth celebrations began soon after, with early observances dating to 1866. These gatherings were often centered around churches and community spaces in Texas. That detail matters because freedom was not only a legal status, it had to be built into culture, memory, and public life. Formerly enslaved people gathered to pray, speak, eat, sing, remember, and teach younger generations what had happened. In a society that often tried to minimize black freedom or control black public assembly, celebration itself became a statement. Juneteenth created a shared anniversary for people whose families had survived slavery and now had to build institutions, schools, churches, businesses, and political lives in the face of violent resistance. As Juneteenth traditions developed, food, music, speeches, and reunions became central. By the 1920s and 1930s, the holiday had become more commercialized in some places, often taking the form of festivals. But that commercialization did not erase the deeper meaning. Community festivals could serve many purposes at once: celebration, education, economic activity, and cultural pride. They gave families a reason to return home, elders a way to pass down memory, and local communities a platform to honor resilience. In this sense, Juneteenth was not only about looking backward to 1865. It was also about asking what freedom required in the present, especially in a country where segregation, disenfranchisement, and racial violence still shaped daily life. Juneteenth spread beyond Texas largely through the movement of people. During the Great Migration, millions of African Americans left the South for cities in the North, Midwest, and West, seeking better jobs, safer communities, and greater political possibility. They carried traditions with them, including Juneteenth. A holiday that began with special importance in Texas became part of a broader national memory. This spread shows how culture travels through families, churches, neighborhoods, and community organizations. It also shows why Juneteenth became more than a regional observance. The experience it commemorated was rooted in Texas, but the larger story of delayed freedom, Black perseverance, and the struggle to make emancipation meaningful belonged to the entire country. During the civil rights movement of the 1960s, Juneteenth was sometimes overshadowed by urgent national campaigns against segregation and voter suppression. Activists were focused on sit-ins, marches, legal challenges, school desegregation, and voting rights. Yet the values behind Juneteenth and the civil rights movement were deeply connected. Both asked whether freedom promised on paper would actually be delivered in daily life. Both exposed the distance between American ideals and American reality. In the 1970s, Juneteenth celebrations gained renewed popularity, with greater emphasis on African American freedom, history, and arts. This revival helped frame the holiday not as a relic of the past, but as a living reminder that freedom must be defended across generations. Formal recognition came gradually. Texas recognized Juneteenth by proclamation in 1938 and later by legislation in 1979. Over time, every U.S. state and the District of Columbia came to recognize the holiday in some way. This slow official acceptance reveals something important: national memory is often built from local persistence. Communities celebrated Juneteenth for generations before the federal government recognized it. The holiday did not begin in Washington. It began with people preserving a date because it mattered to them, even when the broader country paid little attention. Official recognition followed community memory, not the other way around. That is one reason Juneteenth feels different from many holidays created from the top down. In 2021, Juneteenth became a federal holiday when Congress passed, and President Joe Biden signed, the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act. It was the first new federal holiday since Martin Luther King Jr. Day was adopted in 1983. That timing is significant. Federal recognition arrived after decades of activism, scholarship, local celebration, and growing public awareness of racial history. But federal status also brought new questions. How should the country observe Juneteenth without reducing it to sales, slogans, or a day off work? The answer depends on whether people treat the holiday as a chance to learn, reflect, gather, and confront history honestly. Recognition is meaningful, but remembrance requires participation. Juneteenth is also not confined to one narrow national story. It is celebrated by the Muskogos, descendants of Black Seminoles who escaped slavery in 1852 and settled in Coahuila, Mexico. Their observance reminds us that the history of slavery and freedom crossed borders, involved migration, resistance, and survival, and cannot be fully understood through a single map. At its core, Juneteenth is about delayed freedom becoming public truth. It remembers the people who endured slavery, the people who fought to destroy it, and the communities that preserved the memory long before it became nationally recognized. The date June 19, 1865, matters because it shows that freedom is not real until it reaches the people who were denied it. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.